In 1934, a young but reputable composer named Dmitri Shostakovich premiered the opera Lady Macbeth of the Mtsensk district in Leningrad and Moscow. Lady Macbeth of the Mtsensk district described the justified poisoning of a brutal dictator in 4 acts. Many often claimed that it was representative of the oppression of the Russian people under the Soviet government. A command performance for the Russian High Command was ordered just 2 nights later and was attended by the leader of the Soviet Party, Joseph Stalin. He was disgusted and left just before the 3rd act. He would later denounce Shostakovich in an editorial by the Pravda, a state-run newspaper, viciously attacking his music as being against the people. Many in the Composers Union who had praised Shostakovich in the past were now lining up to denounce him. Even Shostakovich himself knew that his life was in danger. About 4 years and 3 symphonies later, there was an alleged attempt on Stalin's life. Stalin accused a one-time ally who had betrayed and exiled Leon Trotsky. Any political dissident or enemy was accused and summarily executed. These investigations were conducted by the KGB. Shostakovich himself was called in by a KGB investigator for questioning. He was released to his family and ordered to return 2 days later for further questioning. He knew that people who went to the second meeting never returned. He used the 2 days to say goodbye to his family, but when he returned to the investigator's office, he learned that in those 2 days, the investigator had been charged as a Trotsky supporter and executed. It wasn't until Shostakovich's 7th Symphony that he regained political popularity as a nationalist composer. It was composed during the siege of Leningrad when the Russian people were starving at the hands of German invaders. The work was so well received by the Russian people that it was titled the Leningrad Symphony and praised by Stalin as a symbol of the vibrant and undying culture of the Russian people. In a state where public opinion is controlled by the government, it doesn't need to outright ban your music to censor it. All they have to do is morally oppose it until it's no longer convenient for them.
Although Wagner and Hitler were never alive at the same time, Nazi Germany has strong ties to Wagner and his music. Hitler looked up to and admired Wagner. Wagner was famous for his incredible compositions, controversial operas, and anti-Semitic writings. As Wagner's fame grew, so did his public commitment to anti-Semitism. Wagner had a huge impact on Hitler. Hitler's teenage viewing of Wagner's opera Rienzi made him understand that his destiny was to strengthen and unite the German weak. In 1850, Wagner wrote his famous treatise, Judaism and Music. He wrote that the Jewish artist can only speak in imitation of others, make art in imitation of others. He cannot really speak, write, or create his own. Hitler rarely mentioned Wagner in his writing or speeches. However, when he did, it was about Wagner's role as a German leader and visionary. This is one of the reasons why Wagner will always have a strong tie to Nazi Germany and the reign of Adolf Hitler. Paul Hindemith had a complicated relationship with the Nazi Party. Although Hindemith was not Jewish, his marriage to a Jewish woman and friendships with leftists did not win him the favor of the Nazis. Hindemith taught at the Berlin Academy of Music from 1927 to 1935 when he took an indefinite leave of absence. Fearing for their safety, Hindemith and his wife moved to Switzerland in 1938 and emigrated to America 2 years later. Before Hindemith left for Switzerland, the famous Hindemith affair occurred. This happened when Hindemith's opera Matthias the Painter was planned to be premiered for the 1934-1935 season. Its performance was prohibited by a Nazi official. Furtwängler, the conductor of the opera, threatened to resign unless this ban on Hindemith was lifted. He even wrote open letters to the press defending Hindemith. Hindemith went on to have a successful career in America, where his music had been performed since the 1920s. In America, Hindemith took a post at Yale University in 1941. He was granted citizenship in 1946 and began his career as a conductor in 1947.
Throughout history, there have been various socio-political movements involving censorship, but not many rival the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution in China was the result of a power struggle occurring within the Chinese government. The current leader of China, Mao Zedong, was facing scrutiny after a series of radical domestic and foreign policies known as the Great Leap Forward had left China in a state of crisis. In order to maintain power, Mao created a struggle between the classes. He convinced the lower class that the upper class had a toxic fixation on Western ideals and that this was a threat to true communism. This led to the censorship of Western culture as well as the re-education of the Chinese people. Given the socio-political climate of China at this time, it goes without saying that Western music was not necessarily appreciated. Of the three most popular classical pianists, each suffered imprisonment or exile and had serious strain put on their work. Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, played a large role in the reform of music in China. She addressed Chinese musicians with statements such as, "Capitalism's music is headed for destruction. You do not want to go die along with the foreigners." Chinese musicians struggled to formulate a nationalist style while avoiding Western influence. Despite efforts, hints of Western classical style can still be found in Chinese music from this time period. Though the Cultural Revolution seemed to have a tight grip around China, there was still a good deal of resistance among the people. The government aimed to oust all capitalist influence and push their own agenda, but they were not entirely successful. Bookshops were lined with works by political characters such as Marx, Stalin, and Mao himself, yet the range of books that circulated under the counter expanded enormously. Despite the efforts of the Chinese government, counter-revolutionary culture still thrived and Western influence was still evident.
The examples discussed in this project show how in the last 200 years, political and civil leaders of all types have often tried to control what music people perform and listen to through censorship. In the early 19th century, operas were censored because they were believed to promote revolutionary ideas. In the 20th century, communist leaders like Stalin and Mao used music as propaganda, promoting composers that fit with their agenda, while Hitler censored Jewish composers and promoted what he deemed German music to foster his nationalist goals. In late 20th and early 21st centuries, in free Western democracies, arts organizations that did not wish to offend their audience have censored composers and performers that are considered politically incorrect. All these examples show the power of classical music to influence people's emotions and beliefs, which is why those in power often try to control it. The question remains whether music can ever truly be judged on its own merits, or whether it will always be heard in the context of the politics of the society in which it is played.